Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I am David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer is from the Chicago Tribune. He covers the Bears. You can find the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app. You can watch our podcast, Take the North, on 670 The Score's YouTube page. You can interact. You can tell us what you think. You can react, respond. You can insult, whatever you want to do. You can find us. Okay, Dan. In about 2 weeks, we're now within striking distance of when we will be talking about who the Bears pick at number 9. There's a lot of noise out there. I think it's good to kind of sift through some of the rubble, kind of figure out what is fact, what is fiction, or at least react to some of these reports. So let's start there. I think there's a lot going on right now. We're going to get to your story on ChicagoTribune.com where you write about Ryan Poles' state of mind. But I want to get to the most recent report out of ESPN.com. There's a suggestion that the Bears actually are in a position where they like Jalen Carter, and if he is there, the indication was from the reporting that they would take him. There's not sure he will be there, but what are your thoughts in terms of, are you hearing similar things? And I don't know what to make of some of these reports this close to the draft.
Yeah, that would be my first instinct, is to make sure that you understand how close we are to the draft. And if you are very serious about taking a player, it does not behoove you to let it out of your building that you're very serious about potentially taking a player. And so I just kind of sit back here and I honestly, David, I think I've hit the stage where either I've hit the wall or I'm at least getting close to it in terms of the pre-draft noise. We're lucky that we are now within 2 weeks, because the noise will get louder and then we'll have answers to all these questions in 2 weeks. And we'll just have to wait for those answers to come, as hard as it may be at times. And so, I think my initial reaction is, let's see. And let's see what happens on draft weekend. And then let's hear the decision makers at Halas Hall kind of explain their thinking and walk us through the process they took to get to their decisions. But right now, it's just a tornado of speculation, a tornado of noise, and it's really hard to sift report from rumor, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that when you talk about Jalen Carter specifically, every year there seems to be a player that will dictate the course of much of the first round. And I think that this year you can look at, maybe one of the quarterbacks, if 4 are taken in the top 5, as some mock drafts suggest, maybe that person, the wild card, the pivot point will be when Will Levis is drafted. But I really think that it's gonna tell us a lot about what happens the rest of the first round, maybe even about the Bears' willingness to move down, or maybe the teams in front of them, where Jalen Carter goes. You've got the Seahawks that have been linked to Jalen Carter. You've got the Lions at number 6 that have been really linked as a possibility to Jalen Carter. And I think that Jalen Carter, because of the huge contrast between risk and reward, and because of his on the field dominance and his off the field question marks, those are the kinds of things that make him, to me, the most compelling player at the top of this first round.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, the idea 3 months ago that Jalen Carter would even be in the conversation at number 9 would have been ridiculous. And now here we are, and we've been having this conversation now for almost a couple of months at this point, at least 6 weeks. And so now you just have to again, let it all play out. The good news is it will play out. And when it does play out, we'll have a lot of different intel from a lot of different places, a lot of different buildings that will help us kind of piece the puzzle together that we're trying to see right now. And we'll see where it goes.
And just to kind of close the loop of what are they talking about specifically? Matt Miller is quoted in an ESPN published draft report as saying, quote, about the Bears and Jalen Carter: they are said to value him highly, and the implication is that he won't fall past the Bears if he's still there at number 9, which, let's be honest, I mean, this is as we just described, speculation season. It contradicts or is different from some of the previous reporting or indications of what the Bears are thinking about Jalen Carter at number 9.
Yeah, right. And so the seesaw goes this way, then the seesaw goes that way, and then the seesaw goes back this way, and then the seesaw goes back that way.
And let's face it, falls under the category of due diligence. We don't want to ignore it, but we don't also want to make something of it. People out there might be wondering, let's hope that they see a report like that and they think, whoa, I wonder what they think on Take the North podcast. I'll go check it out. So we're going to tell you, I don't know still that has changed my mind. That doesn't sway me to think that, oh boy, they really like Jalen Carter. I think this is part of the process we have to go through. We don't know the source of some of these reports, and there might be some self-interest being served,
Right.
but let's wait and see.
Well, that's the
Um,
most difficult thing right there to that point, David, is particularly with the way it was phrased and what you just read there, it's hard to know the origins of that intel. And the origins of that intel are important because you need to know what the self-interest is of the originator of that intel. And that always is a difficult game to play at any time of the year. It's most difficult to play in late March and throughout the month of April in the NFL.
there's also some speculation out there that the Steelers have called the Bears about moving up to, you're laughing, draft 9th overall. I would also, first of all, before we get any further about like the possibilities and what they're looking for, the Steelers are at 17. They want to move up to 9 to maybe get to a guy who's not going to be there at 17. I would be a little bit wary about making another deal with the Steelers until you figure out just exactly how the last one is going to work out.
Well, my first question, and this is the reason that I laugh, because I tried to do a little homework on this one. What is the origin of the Steelers coming up to number 9? Where did you first hear of this?
I believe it might have been Pro
quote-unquote
Football
rumor?
Talk, or maybe it was reaggregated on some other reaggregation site.
So that's my point. It was reaggregated from an aggregation of an aggregation from a reaggregation of a podcast where it was set in like minute 55 of a podcast for like 8 seconds during a long discussion of things that may happen in the draft. And so right now, as we sit here on April 13th, a team vocally and publicly making its intention to move up to number 9 from 17 makes little sense to me, because we don't know what's going to happen with the first 8 picks of the draft. Who exactly are they moving up for? Why wouldn't they move up to 8? Why wouldn't they move up to 10? What it just like the idea that there's a very concrete discussion being had between the owners of the 17th pick and the owners of the 9th pick on April 13th it doesn't fit for what the world operates like. If this happens on draft night, I'll go back and take all this back and find the origins of this aggregation, reaggregation, and I'll apologize profusely, but this to me classifies as a lot of noise that then gets put out by the Daniel Greenbergs of the world on Twitter, and then Baranon gets crazy with it, and then we all end up reacting to it.
Happens every year, and I guess it falls under the category of due diligence, but maybe that's even overstating it. Okay, I want to get to your story in the Chicago Tribune, chicagotribune.com, where you reference Ryan Poles' long journey.
Yeah.
The long journey. We've talked about this a little bit. How would you describe what you wrote in the Tribune and why it's relevant now?
Yeah, there's a couple parts to this that I think are relevant as we march our way to the draft. And it's number one, it's the emphasis and re-emphasis that Ryan Poles has had for a while now about how he is approaching this and how he sees a bigger picture and how he sees steps in the process of what he's trying to build here, which is a championship team that can be a championship team for more than one season. And so in his own words, I asked him at the owners meetings just kind of to generally describe what's at stake in this draft that comes up later this month. And he essentially said that it is mostly about adding to the core that they want to have of a team that will eventually become a championship contender, and how that sort of requires you to recognize needs and acknowledge needs, but use discipline in terms of the way you approach the draft. His direct phrase, I think, was, we're trying to set this up for the long journey that we're on. And so the constant reemphasis that this is a long journey, I think, should give us all a second to take a step back, to take a deep breath, to understand that we are caught in the tornado right now of April 2023 noise and speculation and rumor, and that there's a bigger picture that the people that are making the decisions in house all have to see. And some of that comes with the idea that, look, like, this isn't a one opportunity, a one at bat attempt for Ryan Poles. He's going to get 10, maybe 12 chances to swing this draft. He's going to get more chances to swing next year with 2 first-round picks. He's going to get more chances to swing in 2024. And so just having that grounded, sober understanding of where your roster is and where it needs to go, I think allows you to prioritize patience and discipline, where sometimes maybe the pressure to get it all done right now gets really, really intense because of all the noise that's out there surrounding a draft that we all think is going to be critical.
You think the fan base has patience and an appetite for that kind of waiting and that kind of rhetoric and that kind of plan? Because
I don't know.
while
Yeah.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from and why that is not maybe, the prudent way. And certainly it's a way that you could envision ownership endorsing. I do wonder about the fan base in Chicago that's already been through a lot.
Right. No, so it's a good thing to wonder about. It's another thing for Ryan Poles to be guided by that in any way, shape, or form. It's very easy to get sort of wobbly on that tightrope because, again, Ryan does not have to answer for the sins of his predecessors, for Ryan Pace and Phil Emery, and to some extent Jerry Angelo, and all of the hardship that this fan base has been through over the last 2 decades. What he has to answer for is himself and the work he puts forward and the approach that he takes to it. Now, that's a lot easier said in principle than it is done in reality, because eventually the patience wears out, and all of the forgiveness that Ryan was afforded in 2022 is going to expire. It's my belief that it's going to expire in 2023 in a way that leaves a lot of people in this fan base extremely agitated, because I don't think that they have taken the same view of this as Ryan Poles has. They may say they have and understand that this is a long journey and that there are steps in this process, but I do think it's going to get incredibly frustrating if you're 4 games under 500 and 5 games under 500, maybe 6 games. No matter how this season goes, it's going to be a different tone. It's going to be a different tenor than we experienced in 2022, and it just all harkens back to what you and I were talking about in the months of December and early January, that look like if you're expecting there to be some magic dust to turn this from a piece of poop into a diamond, like it's not coming, and so you just have to understand that there is a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of successes and a lot of percentages that you have to hit at a high level on to get to where you want to go. And so Ryan's got to just drive the bus according to that. And eventually, I do think that outside noise is going to get louder, and then we'll see how he adapts accordingly.
Realistically, how many out of the first 4 picks, out of the top 64 players off the board, the Bears have 4 of those picks? How many of those would you envision, not knowing who they are, but how many ideally are they going into this draft thinking they would be week 1 starters?
Look, I minimum 3. And ideally 4. That's the state of your roster right now. There is no one at any position that is locked in as a 2025 have to have blue chip crown jewel of this football team. And so you're trying to find answers everywhere you can find answers, to have premium picks, to be able to pick in the top 10, to be able to then add a couple second rounders, to then add the first pick of round 3. You've got an opportunity, David, to make your roster better. And so I think you have to look at it through the lens of, we need to get 3 guys at least, and hopefully 4 out of those top 64 picks that give us a chance to start in week 1. And then ultimately those guys have to become more than just week 1 starters on a last place team. They've got to become, reliable contributors for the long haul of a team that is showing us that it's on the climb.
We talk about the report or rumor about the Steelers trading up, which is very vague, I think, in just general in terms of a report. But I wonder this philosophically: when you see some of these mock drafts, we talked about Mel Kiper's the other day, which I thought was a little unorthodox for somebody whose expertise is in this exact thing, and this is his Super Bowl essentially. And I believe that he had Will Anderson going 5th in that draft and 4 quarterbacks going off the board right away. I wonder, are we not considering the possibility that the Bears might move back up if somebody moves 5th or 6th? And could that be something philosophically you could see Ryan Poles doing or being fixated on? Because if this goes that way and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, that'd be something I could understand.
You'd have to tell me the player that it would be for. I think
Will Anderson, or possibly, if they are in love with Jalen Carter, possibly him.
Yeah, the price tag would mean everything to me, because you're accumulating draft capital with the understanding that you need to fill a lot of holes. And the whole purpose right now of calling this the quote unquote long journey is understanding that the more opportunities you have to fill these holes, the better. And so it better be someone beyond special that you then go away and spend some of that capital on. I would be more intrigued by the idea of the Bears moving on at 9 and maybe going back to 13 or 15 or
Yeah.
17, whatever it may be,
Right.
because then you potentially could still get guys that we've talked about on this program, Bijan Robinson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba in the lower teens. Add another pick somewhere to your arsenal there on day 2, and have an opportunity then to maybe add 5 week 1 starters to your roster, on the first 2 days of the draft. So that certainly, I would not poo-poo that if they chose to go down that path. You obviously have to be careful. You have to understand what opportunity costs are at various points of the draft. But man, like this is again, the scenarios are going to play out in their pre-draft meetings at Haugh. Now it's up to them to just kind of figure out, what floats their boat and what kind of compels them to make decisions.
You mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba, the former teammate of Justin Fields at Ohio State, and where he might actually go in the draft. It brings up the conversation you had with Tyke Tolbert, the Bears wide receivers coach. And I thought it was interesting how you described it, how speed is what he seeks most in a receiver. And you asked him then, what is the most hardest to read, or the thing that disappointed him the most or misjudged? And he said the same answer: speed. So it's not always what it seems. And my head went immediately to Velus Jones. They drafted him. The Bears drafted him last year in the 3rd round, and the biggest selling point was his speed. But you need more as a wide receiver. How would you characterize what your conversation was like with Tyke Tolbert? Because that was pretty good stuff.
It was a fun entry point. That little anecdote that you just shared about speed being the thing that is most attractive and also the one that has burned you the most, to a deeper conversation about kind of how you go through as a receivers coach who's been in the league for almost 2 decades, just feeling out what you want to see in receivers, how you go about doing your homework, how you provide the input to your head coach, your offensive coordinator, and your general manager so that they can figure out kind of what they're looking at, as you go through some things. I did think it was interesting that Tyke said that he's really drawn to guys who know how to cut and separate, and mentioned that in 2003, when he was entering the league as a first-year receivers coach in the NFL, he had Anquan Bolden in Arizona, a guy who ran a 4.71 40-yard dash at the combine and was considered on draft weekend to be really slow. And the Cardinals went out and used the 2nd-round pick on Anquan Bolden. And lo and behold, he had 100 catches and 1,300 yards and wound up in the Pro Bowl as a rookie, and went on to a career where he had 13,000 receiving yards and 80 touchdowns. Nice get there. And so you understand that there is something in this league that calls for separation, right? And the ability to cut and separate. It's one of the things the Bears love a lot about DJ Moore, is that he has those smooth, sudden movements to him that allow him to cut and separate. And so again, I think there is an idea here that the Bears receiving core is better right now. You got DJ Moore, Mooney, Claypool, you got Velus Jones and Equanimeous St. Brown, but it could be even better than that. And the idea that they could potentially swing at receivers on day 2 as early as even in the teens, as we talked about with JSN. But if you want to swing at day 2 with one of those first 4 picks and get Justin another playmaker, then go for it. I listed a few names in there: Michigan State's Jaden Reed, Josh Downs of North Carolina, Jalen Hyatt, a speedster from Tennessee. I don't know if that'll give you any reflux. Cincinnati's Tyler Scott, and then a kid from Princeton. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. It's Andre Ivasovic, something of that nature. But those are 5 names that could make sense for the Bears in that mid 50s, early 60s range if they wanted to add another playmaker to that receiving core.
I turned on the Cubs a little late. Do we know how DJ Moore fared in throwing out the first pitch? Did he go heat? Did he go breaking pitch? Was it across the plate?
I have not seen. We have to get that video and
See
what's there. Yeah,
we'll have to work on that. Okay, so Dan, before we move on for some of this draft speculation, there are a couple things that we go into. You always want to keep an open mind. I always try to keep an open mind, but in reviewing some of this stuff and doing our due diligence, there are 2 things that I think conclusions that I've already reached, and maybe prematurely. Number 1, we mentioned it. If the Bears move up and trade up, and it's to get the number 5th overall pick for whatever reason, scenario, drafts are hard to figure, but I would think I'm against them trading up unless they can get Will Anderson at 5 or 6 or somewhere in that range, because the mock draft that Mel Kiper had, I think the Lions were getting Will Anderson at number 6. If that's the case, I would do everything in my power, if I'm Ryan Poles, move up to number 5 and take Will Anderson to keep him away from the Lions. You don't want Aiden Hutchinson and Will Anderson coming at you coming at Justin Fields for the next 5 to 10 years. So I would be okay with that. That's number 1. The second thing to that is that if you are at number 9 and they end up taking the offensive tackle from Tennessee, I will have thought that they should have moved down. I think that that's a very general
Yeah.
thing to say, but Darnell Wright is not to me somebody based on evaluation, based on just seeing some of the tape, based on the other tackles available. If they take Darnell Wright at number 9, I will have thought they could have moved down and accumulated another asset or two to do that and still gotten an offensive tackle they could live with. So those are right now, as I start to formulate ideas 2 weeks before the draft, those are two that I feel pretty good about.
All right. Well, two things to that last point. Number one, moving down is only possible if someone wants to move up. I think that there's kind of a thought process sometimes amongst people that follow the draft is like, if you don't like somebody at your pick, just go ahead and move down. Somebody's always coming knocking on your door. It doesn't always work that way. Somebody's got to be compelled to come up and get what you have. And so if you are left choosing at 9, you just have to make sure you're really comfortable with the discussions you've had to establish your board and know where it's at. If you have chosen beyond a shadow of a doubt that Darnell Wright is a better tackle than Skoronski or Paris Johnson or Broderick Jones, and that's the move you make, well, then you're going to have to explain it to people. I also think that one of the biggest question marks about Darnell Wright coming into this draft is how quick he is and how agile he can be. And that seems to be something that Ryan Poles prioritizes with what they run in their offense with the Bears. And so that question mark would linger for me as well. Again, I'm really happy that we're in the final 2 weeks of mock drafts and speculative conversations. I think our buddy Brad Biggs is going to have his next mock draft this weekend. I do not know, as we sit here recording, which direction he's going to go with the Bears pick at number 9. That'll give us something else to talk about next week. And as you know, there's probably been 10 to 12 names that have been linked to the Bears in mock draft worlds since February. And there'll probably be 1 or 2 more surprise twists before we actually get to draft weekend.
Wow. I didn't know Bigsy was working on his over the weekend. I cannot wait for that. I need to definitely get in touch with him to try to influence him to come to, just to kind of give him something else to think about and see how he takes my suggestions.
You know how to reach him, so get on the phone after this, and then we'll see how convincing you can be in getting him to change his approach.
All right, there are a couple other things I want to get to. Any other draft nuggets before we move on from the draft possibility, speculation, rumor, or innuendo?
No, I look like it's all out there. It's all out there. So I guess my countdown now is at what we're at, like 17 days till I can crack open the bottle of bourbon or the bottle of champagne and the festive, party blowers and say, hey, speculation season's over and the Bears have an 11-man draft class.
I kind of like it. I don't mind it. You're never wrong when you speculate. Okay, I want to get to something that came up this week on the Mully and Haugh show on 670 The Score, and people who want to listen to it can go back to the Odyssey app and use the rewind button to find the interview. But Mully and I interviewed Brandon Johnson, the mayor-elect from Chicago. We talked about a variety of things, but one of them obviously was Soldier Field. And in asking him some questions about what's next for Soldier Field, Dan, I think I referred to it and I used the word inevitable, that if it was inevitable, as it seems that the Bears are moving to Arlington Heights, what then does that mean for the future of Soldier Field? And how would that relationship be in that sort of awkward phase of the Bears moving as they build and them being there? And with due respect, and I think this is what he needs to do in the way of due diligence, he corrected me. And he not corrected me directly. He basically framed his answer to make sure that there was nothing that should be assumed from his vantage point. And I'll read you the answer, what he said. Brandon Johnson: I'm not going to accept inevitability. And I've asked ownership to give me an opportunity to be able to assess, and then we can make a collective determination together. I don't know that it means anything. I don't know that he could have said anything else, but did you interpret that in a way that was newsworthy or significant, or did you just file that under things a new politician who was just elected mayor of Chicago has to say about Soldier Field?
Well, I don't have the direct quote in front of me from George McCaskey in Phoenix a couple weeks ago where there was at least a crack open in the door of being willing to listen to the new leadership in Chicago. At that time, the runoff wasn't finished, and George was curious to see who was going to win the mayoral election and then figure out where the next line of communication needed to come from. I do think that the Bears' central focus is on Arlington Heights. I do think that we've established for a while now that there are going to be a lot of political, financial obstacles that sort of turn this whole journey in various right turn, left turn, U-turn, back around, and it's going to go in a lot of different directions before we're actually breaking ground in Arlington Heights to build a stadium. So inevitable is a strong word, right? Because that's probably one word short of imminent, and I think there's just a lot of things that need to happen before we get there. At the same time, the Bears didn't go into this buying a plot of land for almost $200 million and going out and getting a team president with experience building a megaplex stadium to then pivot and try to figure out how to make things work again in the city with a building that they don't own. So I 600 to 1 long shot. Sure. Maybe Chicago and Brandon Johnson are still in the race, but right now I think common sense says that the focus is going to be on Arlington Heights, and we just have to kind of follow the twists and turns of that whole storyline.
I'll have to talk to my people at FanDuel to see if they could give us odds on what the would be that the Bears don't actually break ground in Arlington Heights. But in all seriousness, there are a lot of bureaucratic hurdles, political hurdles, financial hurdles to clear. And you've got also the reality we're going to be reminded of just how uncertain it may be, because you got, this week in the Sun-Times, our buddy Rick Morrissey's writing about, be careful what you wish for Arlington Heights. And he's referencing the situation in Minnesota with US Bank Stadium and what they're on the hook for and what those renovations will cost on an annual basis. So there will be the public component, the pushback at some point in time that everyone will have to address. So I guess maybe inevitable was a leading word, but when you have the mayor-elect on your sports talk radio program, you use leading words, Dan. You have to.
Well, at least you pushed him into an answer that was noteworthy and it was interesting. And look, a good look. I think as we've all said over time, like the mayor of Chicago's got some bigger fish to fry and some bigger issues to solve.
No doubt.
The Bears are probably in the bottom basket of the inbox. But look, like it's going to be, again, it's a years-long process to figure out and sift through all this stuff. I think everybody's just got to be ready for it. Like you mentioned US Bank Stadium in Minnesota. I obviously was up there during some of the crazy twists and turns in that, and I had forgotten that they had essentially committed to building the stadium in Arden Hills, Minnesota, and had a press conference and artist renderings and things that looked wonderful. And you're like, oh, the Vikings in Arden Hills, and then you look back 10 years later and you go, oh yeah, that fizzled, and it ultimately just became like a pawn in a chess game that you didn't know which direction it was going.
It's instructive. There's no doubt about it. And speaking of that building project, it leads us to our final point. So Kevin Warren, the new president of the Chicago Bears, officially takes over Monday, April 17th, which means Friday, April 14th, is Ted Phillips' last day at Haugh Hall. I guess they're going to go out at 5:02. They're going to paint over his parking spot. It's no longer going to say Ted parks here or whatever it says. But I don't know that there's anything other than semantics and paperwork that will reflect this, Dan. But the end of an era officially at Haugh Hall Friday at 5 o'clock, when Ted Phillips makes his way out of the building, and Kevin Warren will replace him officially on Monday. And then I suppose, if they haven't already, the one-on-one individual meetings will commence with everybody giving him their suggestions about what they want to change.
So that was what I was going to say, is two parts of the significance here. Part one is that, Kevin and George told us in Phoenix that Ted was going to be hanging around as a consultant. He was there. He's going to be on speed dial. Anything that he can do to help Kevin make this transition, he will still be kind of involved in helping that bridge be crossed. Number two is that first official day is the day that Kevin Warren promised to start doing those individual interviews with every single person who works for the Chicago Bears and learning more about what they want, what they see, how he can help that become a better workplace, a more successful operation. That, to me, is going to be fascinating. I'm really interested to put a bug inside Haugh Hall and get the transcripts of every one of those interviews, because I think that if they're honest, if they are candid, if they are forthright, you are going to, in Kevin Warren's seat, going to learn a lot about the Chicago Bears from the people that know it best, those inside the building. Fascinating stuff that's going to come across his desk really soon.
I cannot confirm this, but I have heard through the grapevine, Larry Mayer from ChicagoBears.com has blocked off 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, a 3-hour window for an airing of grievances Monday afternoon. We'll find out if there's anything to that report, but Larry has a lot to say and many ideas to offer.
I was told that it was going to be from noon to 2 because
Okay.
that would allow it to be lunch with Larry, which is obviously the staple of Larry Mayer's world. And so I like Larry knows
Yes.
a little bit about that
Hey,
building.
I think lunch with Larry, why not? They can monetize his madness and go see how many clicks he could create. That's all part of his job and the beauty of being Larry Mayer.
Yeah, I look like if people are dizzy trying to get the Bears onto Hard Knocks, more compelling to me would be just give me the videos like it's a deposition video or witness testimony. Just provide me the raw videos of these employee interviews with Kevin Warren. I would watch every damn last one of them, David. I promise you.
All right, we will get out of here, but one last Bears-related thought that I got a little triggered this on Thursday morning talking about the Blackhawks and basically retiring Jonathan Toews is still after Kyle Davidson, the general manager for the Blackhawks, announced that Jonathan Toews will not be part of the future. They will not offer him a contract. Basically, Thursday night will be his last game. They are retiring him before he announces his own retirement. Makes me wonder yet again, why in the world did Ryan Poles call that guy?
Just needed some information to help him get a trade done.
Okay, good. I just want to get that off my chest.
I didn't want to trigger you any further.
I know, that's okay. I'm just getting over. I just caught my breath after the morning rant.
As a hockey guy, how are you handling the end of the Toews era?
Oh, Jonathan Toews. If Patrick Kane was my favorite player to cover during the Blackhawks heyday and era, and since I've been in Chicago, Jonathan Toews was the player I probably respected the most. I think of Paul Konerko. I think of some other Bears in that time. And I think of Jonathan Toews as a guy that represented the organization as well as he could through some very difficult times. And now when his body is betraying him, yeah, I am going to miss Taser. Wasn't always flashy, and that was the beauty of what he brought. 3 cups, one of the best ever to do it in a Hawk sweater. Number 19 one day will go in the rafters. I think he deserved a little bit better. And I would have maybe talked to him to bring him back. And I did make a Bears parallel here before we get off. Brian Urlacher wasn't offered a contract, kind of ushered out the door by Phil Emery. He had more value to the Bears than he did the rest of the league. Likewise, Jonathan Toews has more value to the Blackhawks than he does to the rest of the league. Even if he retires, it doesn't make what his last days as a Hawk any more right than they feel right now, which feels kind of wrong. So I am not going to say anything else before I get into another rant. So,
well, my last thing on this is that the end of the Urlacher career as a Bear was instructive to me on how cruel this league can be, because not only was it the idea that the season ended and he was just sent out the door via basically a press release from Phil Emery, but it's the idea that the last play he played as a Chicago Bear was chasing down Russell Wilson in a game that the Bears were like ready to win, and then blew, and then the season fell apart, and then the next thing you know, you're like, wait, that's it for Brian Urlacher's legendary career here. And it was that first like slap in the face, hard, cold reminder that like when your time is done, it's just done in this league. And very few guys get to go out on their own terms. And it's usually a very, very cruel ending for most guys that play in this league.
Especially in Chicago. It seems like especially in Chicago, the exits are clumsy. It seemed a little bit clumsier here, but we digress. Okay, Dan, there's a lot that we're going to still have to get to next week. We haven't even touched on our trip down memory lane with Dan Bazine and our columns on Mitch Trubisky and a lot of other stuff we will get to next week. But we're going to wrap things up today because there's not much else to speculate about, and I'm sure there will be by the next time we gather.
I guarantee you there will be.
So for Dan Wiederer and Adam Studzinski, I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show. You can find Take the North podcast on the free Odyssey app. You can watch us on the 670 Scores YouTube page. Thank you for listening. Download, listen, and subscribe. We will talk to you next time.
Great talk. See you out there.